Greetings, and welcome to my channel. I'm the Anunnaki Theorist. In my last few videos, I was kind of a bit on the dark side, a little bit gloomy, talking a lot about doomsday and things like that. So I thought, no, I'd go a little bit on the brighter side of things. Give a little bit of a shining story, having a little bit of golden opportunity of hope. Yes, this video is going to be talking about gold. And in particular, why mankind sees gold as valuable in the first place. I mean, truthfully, if we think about it in the point of view of mainstream academia, when we're looking at, anthropology and we're looking at history, why would man even see gold as valuable in the first place? I mean, truthfully, this is what gold looks like in its natural state. These are veins of gold. Now, in my opinion, if we're looking at it from like a beauty point of view, if we're looking at it some sort of an aesthetic quality, the stuff that gold is usually found in, which is quartz, if you've got a really nice looking, well-formed quartz crystal, that to me would actually look more valuable than gold. I mean, yeah, it's yellow, it's shiny, it's easy to melt, and it's highly malleable. This is the reason why people make trinkets out of it. It's the reason why people made coins out of it. But what is its actual value? Well, this is the veins of gold. Now, Earth does not create gold. Earth creates some things, but a lot of things that is inside Earth is not created from Earth itself. It's actually created from an exploding star. How is gold formed, and where does it come from? Now, we don't know this for a fact because we've never actually witnessed a close enough supernova to where we've actually seen that these elements are formed. But one thing that we have to understand about a star, its primary fuel source is hydrogen. Now, a star is a fusion furnace. Through pressure and heat, and there's massive amounts of both, it fuses base elements into higher and higher and higher elements, until eventually it starts forming iron. Once a star starts forming iron, this is its death knell. This is the death throes of the star. But it doesn't stop fusing. It keeps fusing all the way up until it actually dies. And of course, the death of a star, the remains is usually either it becomes a neutron star or it becomes a black hole, although we don't know for sure. But when a star goes supernova, it's still fusing. And this is supposed to be where we get gold. it starts forming what are called the platinum group metals. This is your silver, your gold, your palladium, your platinum. Okay. And then the final element that it creates is uranium. Okay, so the star goes supernova, and it starts spreading out all this material, all these elements that it's formed, and they go to either a gravity well that is forming, or because of the amount of mass, because there's a lot of stuff that comes out of these stars. But this mass starts creating a gravity well, and it starts forming another star. Now, the first things that are going to come together in this gravity well are the lighter elements, and that's going to be your hydrogen and your other lighter gases and dust. And this is what creates the star. But as the star is forming, and you got the gravity well, it starts pulling more material in, but it doesn't quite make it to the star. Instead, creates its own gravity well and starts forming a planet. And this is where we would get gold, because one of the things that it says when a planet is forming. Now, again, this is not something that we know for a fact. This is done via some sort of a model, because of the various forces, the various physics. Okay, so it says, during the initial formation of a planet, heavy iron sinks into the middle to form the planet's core. This iron took other heavy elements, like gold, with it. Okay, so technically, these metals should be in the core. But what it's saying is, it says that scientists say gold is 10 times more common on the planet's crust than what it should be. So their belief is that this gold is arriving on Earth later via asteroids. Now, that is a possibility. We don't know. It's just one of those things that is proposed, the idea. But when we get into the Anunnaki legends, now, this is one of the things that we kind of have to understand, okay? We get into the Enuma Elish, the epic of creation, and of course this is the Babylonian version. This wasn't just in mankind's legends. According to Zecharia Sitchin, this was in the Anunnaki legends. It's the whole reason why they knew that gold was on Earth. Because when we get into and this is the Lost Book of Enki, when Absu was forming, now Absu is the name of our star to the Sumerians. There's one thing that I need to point out. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. And this is a pet peeve of mine. This is right up there with people incorrectly using envy and jealousy. I know, the new laws or rules of English have kind of changed, and so they're synonymous. They can actually be used interchangeably. But I still have a problem with people using envy and jealousy incorrectly. But with this, the idea that we are, it's called the solar system. And people use it, that term, solar system, for any stellar system. Any star that would be out there that has planets around it, they still classify it as a solar system. But that's not the way it should be. The reason why we are called the solar system is because of the name of our star, which is Solaris, or Sol for short. This is the reason why we are the solar system, because of the name of our star. Any other quote-unquote solar systems, their star isn't called Sol. So as a general term, they're just stellar systems. Okay, so I got that out of my head. Alright. Anyway, so it says that Absu was forming. Absu was the star. It talks about that Absu was asleep. Okay, what this is meaning is before a star ignites, as it's pulling in all the material into the gravity well, it hasn't ignited yet. It's just pulling in this matter. I mean, eventually the matter does reach a point of critical mass and then the star ignites. So it's talking about even before the star ignited, it's pulling in all this material, and all this other material is being pulled in but doesn't quite reach Absu. And it starts creating its own gravity well. And this is where we get Tiamat, the mother of all, as a spouse for himself he fashioned. Okay, before I go any further, like I said, this is essentially the Enuma Elish. This is Zecharia Sitchin taking the Enuma Elish and kind of putting it in more layman's terms. But when we get into the Enuma Elish, this is talking about the formation of our solar system. Even though, and again, this is the L.W. King translation, and this was done in 1902. But we've had some individuals that decided they wanted to retranslate, they wanted to reinterpret the Enuma Elish. So we get this, to where the way that they said is this is basically early man trying to understand the laws of nature in the Mesopotamian region. So you get Absu is not the sun. It's it's not anything like, it's the sweet primeval waters, and Tiamat is the salty primeval waters, and Lamu, which that's Mars, slime, mud, and Lahamu, which is Venus, and perhaps it means silt. So okay, things like this. This is them trying to reinterpret, retranslate the Enuma Elish. The thing is, though, is when we read, especially the L.W. King version, it talks about some things in there that would not make sense if all it was doing was trying to talk about the forces of nature or trying to talk about people. There's a term in here, it says that Marduk, of course this is the Babylonian version, so Nibiru is Marduk in this. It says that the other gods, Anshar, Kishar, Lamu, Lahamu, they gave Marduk a princely circuit. What would that mean if we were looking at it as the laws of nature, or if we were looking at it as, people or gods? They gave him a princely circuit. Well, what would that be? But when we look at it, that this is talking about the formation of the solar system. This is talking about our solar system, period. The princely circuit is the orbit of Marduk. That 3,600 years of Nibiru. That is the princely circuit. And one of the other things that I need to point out, in a lot of these, in the Epic of the Enuma Elish, and then of course in Bel and the Dragon, where it talks about that Marduk brought order to chaos. Okay, when we have a starting solar system, stellar system, the orbits of the forming gravity wells that become planets are not set. They're kind of all wild and everything, and that's what it talks about in here, where it talks about that Tiamat and Absu were upset because the other gods were chaotic. They were making a lot of noise. They weren't settling down. And when we talk about Marduk or Nibiru bringing order to chaos, when Marduk, Nibiru, came through the solar system on its princely circuit, it pulled all of the other gravity wells, or if they were already planets to begin with, it pulled them into their proper orbits. This was bringing order to chaos. Okay. Yeah, I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there. Okay, but one of the things that we get into is the celestial battle. Okay, this is where Marduk is essentially contracted by the other gods to do battle against Tiamat. Okay. One of the things we read about in here is it talks about that Tiamat formed Kingu from herself, and Kingu was essentially her general. If you look at it from a battle point of view, military point of view, and Kingu was given the tablets of destinies, which should not have happened. In other words, it gave him his own orbit. He was going to orbit around Tiamat and any of her other moons. And this wasn't supposed to be. Nobody was supposed to have orbits yet. So, yeah, we get into that. The creation of the moon. There is an accepted hypothesis, and it sounds almost exactly like what happens with the celestial battle. In the celestial battle, the first thing that hits Tiamat is one of Nibiru's moons. Now, Nibiru actually picked up, I think it was like 7. Well, it had like 3, and it picked up 4 more. One of the moons was called Evil Wind. And Evil Wind was the first one to crack Tiamat. Now, when we get into science, and we get into the accepted hypothesis of how our moon was created. Remember, I said that Tiamat created Kingu from herself. We get into the giant impact hypothesis. Now with this, you have Gaia, which that's Tiamat, and then you have Thea. And Thea is supposed to have been a roughly Mars-sized object that slammed into Gaia. Their two materials fused together, and then some of it got blown off, and it went just a little ways away and then recoalesced, and then we got the moon. And one of the things that we have to understand about the moon, science has already told us that our moon is too big for our planet. I mean, the amount of gravity that the moon generates, it shouldn't be. I mean, it's the reason why we have, our tidal forces. It's the reason why we have our 32-degree axial tilt. It's the reason why we have seasons. But if we look at Mars, Mars has 2 moons. Now, Mars is slightly smaller than Earth. And the two moons, Phobos and Deimos, they look like large asteroids. They don't have enough mass. They never did have enough mass to form a sphere. And science says that that's technically, if we were to have a moon, that's the size of the moon that we were supposed to have. Now this gives rise to a lot of people sitting there saying that the moon is an artificial structure. Either it's an artificial structure or it was put into place artificially so that way life could start on Earth, because if it wasn't for the moon, life might not have been able to start on Earth. So, I mean, this is one of the things that the creationists use. This is some of the things that is used in the alien phenomenon community, things like that. Okay, I am more inclined to go more along the line of the giant impact hypothesis. The reason why we have the moon is because of, there was a celestial event. And like I said, that is something that we see in the Enuma Elish. The thing is the giant impact hypothesis is relatively new. Whereas the Enuma Elish, this was thousands of years ago. How would they have known that? There's a couple of other things that we see in the Enuma Elish. You have a couple of gods' planets, and that's the thing. They called planets. Okay, planet just means wandering star. But they called the planets that they seen in the sky the names of their gods. The thing is, though, is you can only see up to Saturn with the naked eye. Every 25 years or so, if you have a decent telescope, you're supposed to be able to see Uranus from Earth. But Neptune, forget it. You ain't seeing it. And Pluto, not going to happen. The thing is, though, is the ancients, they knew about Uranus, they knew about Neptune, and they knew about Pluto. Now, they didn't use the same terms. They used the names of their gods. So, you have Anu, that's Uranus. You have Ea, or Nudimmud, that's Neptune. And then you have little Gaga, and that's Pluto. Neither one of those things would have been known by the ancients. So how did they know? Now, there are a lot of people that say, well, this isn't talking about the formation of the solar system, but again, like I said, read it. There are some things in here that would not make sense any other way except this is talking about the formation of the solar system. Alright, I have gone way off on a tangent on this one, so let's get back to gold, shall we? Okay, so when we get into the things that Zechariah Sitchin talks about, and back to the Lost Book of Enki, honestly, I still would love to know how he knows about this, but this is supposed to be talking about things going on Nibiru. Okay? Now, this is talking about the decay of their atmosphere. Now, their atmosphere was supposed to be fed by large volcanoes. I have talked about the hypothetical question that astrophysicists have been given, the idea of how could life form on a rogue planet if it had a sufficiently dense enough atmosphere and the core was hot enough, that way that the heat from the core would keep the planet warm without it bleeding off into space. So Nibiru has this really, really thick atmosphere. And the reason why it has this really thick atmosphere is because you have huge, massive, put freaking Olympus Mons, which is supposed to be the largest volcano in the solar system. It's on Mars. But these huge, massive volcanoes were constantly erupting, constantly belching out gases and dust that would go high up into the atmosphere and created this thick blanket that kept the heat of Nibiru's core in. Well, it was developing holes. Now, I kind of think this, the way I imagine this is very similar to what we had back when I was growing up. The whole idea of the hole in the ozone layer. You don't hear about it so much anymore. But that's because we took steps to kind of stop the forming of the hole. And then it hopefully, nature took its course and went ahead and healed it for the most part. I think the hole is still there, it's just not that big. So they were getting a situation like that. Okay, so they tried several different things, and this is what they came to the conclusion of. It says, in the councils of the learned to heal the breach, and that's supposed to be breach, there were two suggestions. One was to use a metal. Gold was its name. On Nibiru, it was greatly rare. Within the hammered bracelet, it was abundant. Okay, there's a lot of tangents I'm going on this one. I do need to bring this up. The whole idea of the hammered bracelet. Okay, we see this in the Enuma Elish. When we get into Hebrew, and we get into the book of Genesis in the Bible, I've told you that in Hebrew, one word can have multiple meanings. Okay, so Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Now, in the Hebrew, it doesn't say heaven, it says firmament. It said God created the firmament and the earth. Now, firmament has at least two, there might be more, but at least two meanings in Hebrew. The first, of course, is heaven, and that's the one that they use. The second thing that firmament means is hammered bracelet. Now, the reason why they don't use that is because it doesn't sound like it would make sense. However, if you read the Enuma Elish, after the celestial battle, Marduk contemplated the two halves that were there, that was left. The upper portion, that became earth. But the lower portion, Marduk wanted to make a memorial. Something to remember the celestial battle. So it says that he took his mace and he smashed the lower half of Tiamat and he created the hammered bracelet. And what is the hammered bracelet? That's what we call the asteroid belt. Now, the celestial battle took place between Mars and Jupiter, which is where the asteroid belt is at. So when we look at the Hebrew version of Genesis 1:1, it now states that in the beginning God created the hammered bracelet and the earth. Because this is what happened with Tiamat. When she was split asunder, the lower half became the asteroid belt. And it says that the upper portion was carried away to a distant place, which this is where Earth's orbit is now. And then Earth, the remains basically recoalesced into an oblique spheroid along with Kingu, because that's one of the things that it tells us in the Enuma Elish, is that since Kingu was Tiamat's general, Tiamat's servant, that it would forever be that. So in this new planet that was forming, Kingu, or as we call it, Luna, would forever be tethered to Earth. Okay. Alright. So, getting back into this, it says, it was the only substance that to the finest powder could be ground. Lofted high to heaven, suspended, it could remain. Okay. So here is where we're going to get into something else. This is gold through the use of an electron microscope. Now, gold is shiny, as well as a lot of metals are. They're shiny. The thing is metal is essentially crystal. It's the reason why it shines, is because the atoms that are in the metal form a lattice, and they come together, and that's the reason why you get the shine. Okay, gold is an element, so therefore the only atom that's there is just the gold atom. There's nothing else. But they don't just float around individually. They form these little packets, and then these lattices. But if you break these lattices up, and you get atoms being, or these little lattices being pulled apart, and you make it to where each of these little atoms, that's what these little dots are individual, then you get a white powder. This is known as monoatomic gold. So this is what they were wanting to put up in their atmosphere. Not gold flakes. Monoatomic gold. This white powder. Okay, so I'm not going to play the video. It's going to be in the description. This is by Jim Mars. He is no longer with us. But here's where he tells us about monoatomic gold. Now, the whole video goes in, it's basically ancient technology. But one of the ancient technologies that he talks about is monoatomic gold. And he gives a little bit of background of how it was discovered and some of the other things that are involved with it. But we have this white powder that is gold broken down to its finest form. Now, in here, and of course these things are not validated, I don't actually know if it's true, but some of the things that he talks about is some of the tests that they did on this white powder. And one of them, it says on a scale, the white powder lost 44% of its original weight. Basically, that pan weighed less than that pan when they put the gold in, when they put this white powder in. So it's believed that there's some sort of an anti-gravitic property, but that would actually make sense when we talk about them lofting it into heaven, or putting it up into their atmosphere, because it would stay up there. If it's got an anti-gravitic effect, it would stay up there. couple of the other things that happens, supposedly, when you get when you set this stuff on fire, not fire, but basically bring it to the temperatures of melting. I need to bring something up. I couldn't find the video. I know there's one out there. I don't know. I can't remember if it was Nicolas Flamel, who was a very famous French alchemist, or if it was one of the other French alchemists. Basically, on their deathbed, he said that we have found the Philosopher's Stone, which is what the alchemists look for. And they said it's not a stone, it's not a rock. The reason why we call it stone is because that is the type of heat that is required to get this stuff to work. Think about how hot you need to have something to melt stone. Okay? So this alchemist said that what the Philosopher's Stone was actually a white powder. And it's used to make the elixir of life. Also known as the water of life. Now, here's where we find something interesting. And when I was in the church, and I was doing my Bible studies and everything, when I came across this, I scratched my head and I was like, why? What's the point? What kind of a punishment was that? We get into Exodus 32, 21 and 24. Moses burnt the golden calf in fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on water, and forced the Israelites to drink it. This is after Moses came down from Mount Sinai, after he supposedly had the 10 Commandments, and he seen that the Israelites were worshiping a golden calf. This was also before they started their journey that lasted for 40 years in the wilderness. So what it was that actually happened? Okay, first of all, we got to understand, Moses was educated in the Egyptian court. I mean, he was considered Egyptian royalty. He was adopted into the Egyptian family. So he would have had all kinds of education. And one of the things that he would have had would have been magic and alchemy. So what he actually did, okay, first of all, set gold on fire. What's going to happen? I mean, if you get the heat high enough, yeah, you might melt it. But if you just set it on fire, it's going to turn black because of soot. That's about it. So it wasn't setting it on fire. There was something else that was going on here. Now, the writer, and of course, a lot of people say, well, it was written by Moses. Well, if that was the case, then he would actually be able to explain what that meant. Okay, but that wasn't setting it on fire. There was some sort of an alchemical, or in our modern terminology, chemical process that took place. So he converted this gold into its finest form, ground it into powder, and then put it into water. Now, there's probably some more than just water there, because you can make monoatomic gold. There is a process. There's several videos that you can find online that shows you how to do it, and it requires acids. But you've got individuals who ingest it, either in water or just eat it. It's supposed to have rejuvenation ability, but because we've lost the recipe, like I said, this is what the alchemists were actually trying to do, find this recipe. We don't know what else would have been added to it, so it doesn't quite work the way that it should. Now, it's not going to grant immortality. That's not what it does. The bread of life, the water of life, neither one of them grants immortality. It just gives rejuvenation ability. We don't have rejuvenation ability. Our cells will repair, but we don't have rejuvenation. Rejuvenation is basically reversing aging. You know, making it to where you stay young forever. But we don't have that. But supposedly the bread and the water of life, they do that. Okay. So, one of the things when we get into the biblical story is this was essentially Moses getting the Israelites ready for their 40-year sojourn in the freaking wilderness. Now, one of the other things that we get into when we get into the whole white powder thing is we get into the idea of what was called manna. Now, manna literally means what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. But as they made their journey, and of course, you know, here's Mount Sinai, and then of course, you know, you got this weird route that they took. Truthfully, this amount of distance, yeah, you wouldn't have been 40 years there. You'd have been a couple days, okay, if that. All right, so yeah, wandering around for 40 years in the wilderness. All right, whatever. But as they were doing that, there's mountains all along in here. And on top of these mountains, they found temples, or what they thought were temples. And when the archaeologists, you know, they went through and they were looking at these temples and everything like that, they found on the floor, or sometimes even if they pulled up the stones, the flagstones, they found this white powder. Now, they thought it was just dust. Thought it was like limestone dust or something like that. They didn't realize what it was. But then after this individual that discovered the monoatomic gold, and like I said, watch the video because he goes into it in depth. After they realized, you know, that there's this new form of gold, then they kind of realized what that white powder was that they found in these quote-unquote temples. Now, these weren't temples. These were gold processing plants. And like I said, they were in the mountains all along this route. So it talks about in the Bible that when the Jews would wake up in the morning, there would be all this white powder all over the ground. And Moses told them, gather it up and make it into cakes, and that's what you'll eat. That's the manna given to you from God. This white powder was monoatomic gold, and they were being able to make the bread of life. This is how they survived for 40 years in the wilderness. Now, when we say wilderness, we're talking about desert, where there's not much in the way of wildlife. There's not that much in the way of vegetation. So this eating of the water of life and the bread of life, this is what they were doing. They were getting these rejuvenation abilities so that they could go and survive in the wilderness. Now, in my Tale of Two Atoms video, I talked about Adapa and how he went to heaven and he was offered the bread and the water of life. So the little bit of gold that they did have, this was used to create the bread and the water of life. This is one of the reasons why they had such a long lifespan. I mean, not only was the orbit of their planet, and then of course also the gravity of their planet affected their, their time and their aging process, but also they partook of the bread and the water of life. Okay, so now I've told all about this, and now we need to go back to the whole idea of mankind was created so that they could mine gold. So if you've got the gods, quote unquote gods, seeing that gold was valuable, regardless of what they used it for, but primitive man seeing, oh, well, the gods want this, so it must be valuable. That's the reason why we see gold as valuable. I mean, yeah, nowadays we know that gold has a lot more value than just trinkets and currency. We use it to cover our spacecraft. If you look at the James Webb Space Telescope, those big old mirrors, they are covered in gold because it's got great absorption and reflection properties. But the gods wanted gold, and they created man to mine that gold. That's the reason why we see it as valuable. I'm the Anunnaki theorist. Enjoy.